The Force binds all things across the galaxy, connecting every living being in an invisible web of energy and destiny. For thousands of generations, it has been the ultimate arbiter of power, the light, the dark, and the balance between them defining the fate of civilizations. But what happens when something arrives that exists entirely outside this ancient duality? What happens when a being who has already conquered death, transcended reason, and rewritten the very laws of existence itself steps into a galaxy unprepared for true omnipotence? The dimensional rift tore open above Mustafar like a wound in reality itself. It wasn't a hyperspace anomaly. It wasn't a wormhole or spatial distortion that the Empire's scientists could catalog and explain. It was something fundamentally wrong, a rupture in the fabric of existence that made the lava flows below seem to boil more violently, as if the planet's molten heart recognized the arrival of something that dwarfed its own fury. Inside Fortress Vader, every sensor array simultaneously flatlined before surging back online with readings that made no sense. Energy signatures that registered as both infinite and non-existent. Mass calculations that broke mathematical models. Temperature readings that fluctuated between absolute zero and the heart of a star. Darth Vader stood in his meditation chamber, his respirator's rhythm suddenly irregular, not from physical distress, but from something he had never experienced in all his years serving the dark side. Fear. Not the fear he inspired in others. Not the fear of failure that Palpatine wielded like a weapon. This was primal, instinctive terror that even his cybernetic enhancements couldn't suppress. Through the Force, he felt it, a presence that shouldn't exist. A consciousness so vast and alien that touching it through his Force senses was like staring directly into a supernova. The rift collapsed as suddenly as it had appeared, leaving only a figure standing in the air 300 meters above the lava rivers. He appeared human at first glance. A young man with silver hair and crimson eyes, wearing what looked like ceremonial robes of black and gold. He floated without the telltale distortions of repulsor technology, without any visible means of support. The superheated air that would incinerate an unprotected human within seconds didn't so much as ruffle his clothing. Anos Voldigoad, the Demon King of Tyranny, surveyed his new surroundings with mild interest. Interesting, he said, his voice carrying clearly despite the roar of lava below. Venus de Noah's resonance brought me somewhere with at least some magical energy. Though this feels different. Primitive, perhaps. No, that's not quite right. He could sense it, this strange energy that permeated everything. It wasn't the magical power of his world, nor the various supernatural forces he'd encountered in his conquests. It was something that tried to touch his consciousness, to read him, to influence him. Anos smiled. The energy recoiled as if burned. How fascinating. A universal force that connects all living things. How quaint. He extended his hand, and reality itself seemed to bend around his fingers. But it seems to have limitations. Boundaries. Rules. His crimson eyes gleamed with something that might have been amusement. I wonder what happens when something that exists beyond reason meets a force that demands balance. 3 Imperial TIE fighters screamed overhead, their pilots having finally processed the impossible sensor readings enough to investigate. They opened fire immediately, green laser bolts lancing through the air toward the intruder. Anos didn't move. Didn't raise a hand. Didn't even acknowledge the attack. The laser fire simply stopped 3 meters from his position, frozen in midair like insects in amber. The bolts hung there for a moment before dissolving into harmless light particles. Primitive weapons, Anos observed. But the magical signature behind them suggests a civilization with at least some understanding of energy manipulation. Good. I was concerned this dimension might be entirely beneath my interest. One of the TIE fighters attempted to ram him directly, a desperate maneuver from a pilot who'd recognized conventional weapons were useless. Anos glanced at it. The fighter disintegrated. Not exploded, not destroyed, it simply ceased to exist, as if the universe had collectively agreed it had never been there at all. The pilot's scream cut off instantly. Too weak, Anos said with genuine disappointment. Shh. Surely this galaxy has stronger champions than this. He descended slowly toward Vader's fortress, drawn by the dark energy emanating from within. Now that was interesting, a concentration of power that at least registered on his senses. Not enough to challenge him, certainly, but perhaps enough to provide information about this new realm. The fortress's automated defenses activated, turbolasers, ion cannons, and advanced targeting systems all trained on the approaching figure. The fortress's AI calculated firing solutions, threat assessments, and projected outcomes. Then every system simultaneously crashed, overwhelmed by an entity it had no framework to comprehend. Anos landed gently on the obsidian landing platform, his boots touching down without a sound. The heat radiating from the surrounding lava was intense enough to make the air shimmer, yet he stood completely comfortable, as if he were in a pleasant garden rather than the most inhospitable planet in the galaxy. "I am Anos Voldigoad," he announced to the fortress, his voice carrying with supernatural clarity. "Once the Demon King of Tyranny, now a visitor to your dimension. I seek worthy opponents to test myself against. If this galaxy has champions who can provide entertainment, send them forth." Anos stood on the landing platform, eyes closed, allowing his senses to fully explore this strange new universe. The energy here was remarkable in its subtlety. Unlike the raw magical power of his own world, this force seemed to operate through connection and influence rather than direct domination. It whispered to all living things, suggesting rather than commanding. How inefficient. Still, there was elegance in it. A sort of philosophical framework that had clearly shaped civilizations for millennia. Light and dark, always in conflict, always seeking balance. It reminded him of the gods he'd destroyed in his own world, beings so convinced of their own cosmic importance that they'd forgotten true power came not from universal laws, but from the will to transcend them. The fortress doors hissed open with a blast of superheated air, and Anos opened his eyes. The figure that emerged was impressive by this galaxy's standards. Tall, encased in black armor that radiated a dark energy signature, with a breathing apparatus that suggested significant biological damage. The weapon in his hand, a blade made of pure energy contained in a magnetic field, hummed with lethal intent. Most interesting was the sheer hatred rolling off this warrior in waves. Not mindless rage, but focused, controlled fury that had been honed over years into something approaching an art form. Anos smiled. "Now this is more interesting. You're damaged, physically broken, held together by machinery and sheer will. Yet you haven't allowed that weakness to diminish you. Admirable." Darth Vader's respirator hissed rhythmically as he assessed the intruder. Through the Force, he could sense nothing. Not emptiness like the voids he'd encountered, but something worse, this being simply existed outside the Force's ability to perceive. It was like trying to see through a wall of absolute darkness. "You will come with me," Vader commanded, his voice mechanically enhanced and utterly devoid of negotiation. "The Emperor wishes to speak with you." "The Emperor?" Anos's eyebrow raised. "Ah, so this galaxy has a supreme ruler. Tell me, is he strong? Does he possess power worthy of respect, or merely the authority that comes from controlling the weak?" Vader's lightsaber moved in a blur, a strike designed to disarm and incapacitate in a single motion, refined through decades of dueling experience. The blade should have severed Anos's hand at the wrist. Instead, the lightsaber stopped dead, its plasma blade pressed against Anos's palm. He was holding it bare-handed. The energy blade that could cut through durasteel and deflect blaster bolts was simply touching his skin, producing no heat, no damage, no effect whatsoever. "Fascinating," Anos said, examining the blade with genuine curiosity. "Pure energy contained in a directed field. Elegant design. But far too weak to harm me." He pushed gently, and Vader stumbled backward despite his enhanced strength, the Force itself seeming unable to anchor him against that casual shove. Vader recovered instantly, extending his hand. The Force surged around them, telekinetic power sufficient to crush a starship compressed into a focused point aimed at Anos's chest. Debris from the landing platform tore free and joined the assault. Metal and stone accelerated to ballistic velocities. Anos stood unmoved as everything stopped centimeters from his body, held suspended by his mere presence. Ah, so this is how you wield that universal energy. Interesting technique. Anos gestured dismissively, and every piece of debris reversed direction, shooting back past Vader to embed itself in the fortress walls with thunderous impacts. In my world, we call this basic telekinesis. Useful for beginners, but hardly a threat to anyone of genuine power. Vader switched tactics. Force lightning, a forbidden technique that few Sith ever mastered, erupted from his hands. Purple-white electricity, charged with the dark side's corrupting power, struck Anos directly. The Demon King didn't even flinch. Energy manipulation. Better. Anos caught the lightning in his hand, examining it like a curious specimen. This carries an interesting property: it attempts to corrupt as it destroys. A clever dual-purpose weapon. He closed his fist, and the lightning dissipated. But corruption requires the target to have something corruptible. I exist beyond such concepts. Vader pressed his assault, lightsaber work becoming a symphony of deadly precision. High strikes, low sweeps, feints that had killed Jedi Masters, all executed with mechanical perfection enhanced by precognitive force abilities that allowed him to predict an opponent's moves before they made them. Anos dodged each strike with minimal movement, his hands clasped behind his back as if taking a leisurely stroll. He wasn't reading Vader's intentions through any mystical means, he simply moved faster than the Sith Lord could perceive, his physical capabilities so far beyond human that even force-enhanced speed seemed glacial by comparison. Your technique is refined, Anos commented between Vader's strikes. You've clearly spent years perfecting this combat style. The efficiency of your movements, the way you conserve energy while maximizing lethality, this is the work of a true warrior. Vader said nothing, but his attacks intensified. He drew deeper on the dark side, letting hate fuel his power as Palpatine had taught him. The air around them began to distort from the sheer concentration of dark energy. Yes, that's it, Anos encouraged. Show me the full extent of your power. Don't hold back. Vader thrust his hand forward, and the entire landing platform lurched. The force gripped the very foundations of the fortress itself, attempting to collapse thousands of tons of obsidian and reinforced durasteel on top of Anos. The structure groaned, began to crumble. Anos raised one finger. Everything stopped. The collapsing architecture hung frozen in mid-fall, defying gravity and momentum. With a gentle lowering of his hand, every piece settled back perfectly into place, as if the destruction had never occurred. Impressive environmental manipulation, Anos said. You're using the ambient energy to amplify your power output. Efficient. But you're still operating within the framework of this force and its limitations. He stepped forward, and Vader retreated for the first time in decades. Not strategically, instinctively. Every sense screaming that the being before him was wrong, impossible, something that shouldn't exist. Let me demonstrate the difference between power that follows rules and power that makes them. Anos extended his hand, and Vader felt something incomprehensible grip him. Not the force being used against him, he could defend against that. This was something else entirely, something that bypassed the force completely and touched him on a fundamental level. His armor began to repair itself. The damaged life support systems, the burned flesh beneath the mask, the ravaged lungs, all of it began to regenerate. Vader gasped as pain he'd lived with for years suddenly vanished, replaced by a sensation he'd forgotten existed, wholeness. What are you doing? For the first time, genuine confusion entered Vader's voice. Fixing you, Anos said simply. I cannot properly test a warrior's strength when they're operating at diminished capacity. Consider it professional courtesy. The regeneration stopped as quickly as it began. Vader was healthier than he'd been in decades, but still far from fully healed. Anos tilted his head thoughtfully. Interesting. There's powerful magic worked into your injuries. A curse, perhaps. No, more like, deliberate maintenance of your damage. Someone wants you to remain weak. His eyes narrowed. This emperor of yours? Vader didn't answer, but his silence was confirmation enough. Anos's expression darkened with something approaching anger. How pathetic. A ruler who deliberately cripples his own warriors out of fear they might surpass him. This is not strength, this is cowardice dressed in authority. He turned toward the fortress's interior, his gaze somehow penetrating through walls and distance to focus on something, or someone, far beyond Mustafar. I think I'll accept your Emperor's invitation after all. I'm curious to meet someone so afraid of his subordinates' potential that he'd sabotage them. Anos's smile returned, but it held no warmth. Let's see if he's as powerful as he believes, or if he's simply another tyrant who's forgotten what true power looks like. Vader stood silently, his respirator's rhythm unsteady as he processed what had just occurred. For the first time since his transformation, he'd felt better, and that terrified him more than any enemy he'd ever faced. The Imperial Star Destroyer Ravager hung in orbit above Mustafar like a dagger pointed at the planet's burning heart. Within its command bridge, Admiral Thrawn stood with hands clasped behind his back, studying the sensor data with the analytical precision that had made him one of the Empire's most formidable military minds. Admiral, his sensor officer reported, voice tight with barely controlled panic, the anomaly is still present. All attempts to scan it conventionally have failed. It's as if our instruments can't decide whether it exists or not. Fascinating, Thrawn murmured, his red eyes gleaming. A being that exists outside our ability to quantify. Lord Vader has engaged it. Yes, sir. Communications from the fortress ceased 17 minutes ago, but... Admiral, you need to see this. The holo projection flickered to life, showing grainy footage from a surviving external camera. Thrawn watched in silence as Vader's lightsaber stopped against bare flesh, as the Sith Lord's most devastating attacks were casually dismissed, as the fortress itself nearly collapsed and then impossibly repaired. Increase fleet readiness to combat status, Thrawn ordered calmly. But do not engage. Whatever this entity is, brute force will not defeat it. We need information. Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the Emperor himself. Priority Alpha 1. Thrawn's expression didn't change, but every officer on the bridge felt the sudden tension. Put it through. Private channel. The holo projection shifted, and Emperor Palpatine's hooded form materialized, his features hidden in shadow but his presence unmistakable. Admiral Thrawn, the Emperor's voice was deceptively pleasant. I trust you've been monitoring the situation on Mustafar. Yes, my lord. The intruder demonstrates capabilities that exceed anything in our current threat assessment database. Preliminary analysis suggests. I know what it suggests, Palpatine interrupted, and for just a moment, something other than confidence colored his tone. Not quite fear, the Emperor was far too controlled for that, but concern. This being is not from our galaxy, Admiral. Perhaps not from our reality at all. And it has expressed interest in meeting me. Then it is a threat, my lord. Potentially. Palpatine's fingers steepled beneath his chin. Or an opportunity. Power of this magnitude could be turned to the Empire's service. I want your fleet in position, but you are not to fire unless I give explicit command. Is that understood? Perfectly, my lord. The transmission ended, leaving Thrawn alone with his thoughts. In his experience, beings of immense power fell into two categories, those who sought to rule, and those who sought to destroy. The question was which category this intruder belonged to, and whether there might be a third option the Emperor hadn't considered. Inside the fortress, Anos walked through corridors of polished obsidian while Vader followed at a careful distance. The Sith Lord had not attacked again, seemingly content to escort rather than engage. Smart. Your fortress is impressive. Anos commented, examining the architecture with genuine interest. Built on a planet of constant volcanic activity, designed to withstand extreme heat and seismic instability. The engineering alone demonstrates significant technological sophistication. It serves its purpose, Vader replied, his tone carefully neutral. The partial healing Anos had performed still left him disoriented. He could breathe easier, move with slightly less pain. It was a gift and a violation all at once. Tell me about this emperor of yours. What makes him the supreme authority in this galaxy? Vader considered the question. Normally, he would have struck down anyone who spoke of Palpatine with such casual curiosity. But this being had demonstrated that striking him down was impossible, and perhaps answering questions was the safer path. Emperor Palpatine is the most powerful Force user alive, Vader said. He commands an empire that spans thousands of star systems. His mastery of the dark side is absolute. He orchestrated the fall of the Jedi Order and the rise of the Empire over decades of careful planning. Political manipulation and patient strategy, Anos mused. Combined with personal power. A classic approach to conquest. In my world, I used similar methods, though I tended to prefer direct confrontation. More efficient. They entered a shuttle bay where a Lambda-class shuttle waited, its wings folded upward like a predatory bird at rest. Vader gestured toward it. The Emperor awaits on Coruscant. It is a significant distance, even through hyperspace. Anos examined the shuttle with interest. Faster than light travel? Excellent. I was concerned I'd have to transport myself manually, and crossing galactic distances can be tedious even for me. He boarded without hesitation, settling into a seat designed for human proportions while Vader took the pilot's position. The shuttle lifted smoothly, rising through Mustafar's toxic atmosphere and into the darkness of space. Anos pressed his hand against the viewport, watching as stars became visible beyond the planet's ash clouds. Remarkable. Thousands of inhabited worlds, all connected by this travel method. Your civilization has mastered its local region of space quite thoroughly. The Empire's reach extends to the outer rim and beyond, Vader said, engaging the hyperdrive. There are few places in this galaxy beyond the Emperor's influence. And yet he maintains control through fear and military might, rather than genuine respect. Anos's tone was thoughtful rather than judgmental. I suppose when you lack overwhelming personal power, such methods become necessary. Still, it suggests a fundamental weakness in his rule. You speak dangerously, Vader warned, though without real heat. What was the point of threatening someone who could casually ignore lightsabers? I speak truthfully, Anos corrected. In my world, I was known as the Demon King of Tyranny. I ruled through absolute power, and my subjects obeyed because resistance was meaningless. But I also protected them, led them to prosperity, and never feared their growth. A truly strong ruler enhances their subordinates, not cripples them. The implication hung in the air between them. Vader's hands tightened on the controls. Your Emperor keeps you deliberately wounded, Anos continued. He surrounded you with technology that sustains you but ensures you'll never surpass him. That's not the action of a confident leader, that's paranoia dressed as pragmatism. The Emperor's reasons are his own. Indeed. And I look forward to hearing him explain them. Anos leaned back, closing his eyes. Wake me when we arrive. Hyperspace transit is monotonous. Within seconds, his breathing had evened out into what appeared to be sleep, though Vader suspected this being never truly lowered its guard. The Sith Lord sat alone with his thoughts as the stars stretched into lines and the shuttle entered hyperspace. Anos had healed him partially. Casually, as if repairing decades of damage was no more significant than adjusting a malfunctioning droid. For the first time since his duel on Mustafar all those years ago, Vader allowed himself to wonder, what would it be like to be whole again? To stand before Palpatine without pain, without the constant reminder of his failure and dependence. The thought was dangerous. Seductive. Exactly the kind of temptation the Emperor would expect him to resist. But then again, Palpatine had never anticipated someone like Anos Voldigoad. On Coruscant, in the depths of the Imperial Palace, Palpatine stood before a massive viewport overlooking the planet city. His gnarled hands gripped his cane, and for once, his perpetual confidence had acquired a sharp edge of calculation. He'd felt the disturbance in the Force the moment the rift opened above Mustafar. Every Force-sensitive being in the galaxy had felt it, a presence that existed in defiance of the Force itself, neither light nor dark but something fundamentally other. Palpatine had spent decades manipulating the Force, bending it to his will, using its powers to orchestrate the galaxy's greatest deception. He was the dark side incarnate, the culmination of 1,000 years of Sith planning. And yet, when he'd reached out through the Force to touch this intruder's mind, he'd found nothing. Not because the being was shielded or protected, but because it existed in a space the Force simply couldn't reach. It reminded him uncomfortably of the ancient texts he'd studied, legends of beings from beyond the galaxy who'd visited in eons past. The Celestials, the Bedlam spirits, entities that preceded and transcended the Force itself. If this Anos truly was such a being, the Empire faced either its greatest threat or its ultimate weapon. Palpatine would ensure it became the latter. His chamber doors opened, and his personal guards, the crimson-armored royal guards, snapped to attention as Grand Vizier Mas Amedda entered. "My lord, Lord Vader's shuttle has entered Coruscant's orbital approach. The intruder is aboard." "Excellent," Palpatine hissed, turning from the viewport. "Prepare the throne room. Full Imperial Guard deployment. I want every precaution in place." "Do you believe he poses a genuine threat, my lord?" Palpatine's yellow eyes gleamed in the shadows of his hood. "Oh yes. Perhaps the greatest threat I've ever faced. Which is precisely why I'll be treating him as an honored guest until I determine otherwise. Power respects power, Vizier. And this being radiates it like a dying star." He shuffled toward his throne, already composing the words he'd use. Flattery, veiled threats, promises of mutual benefit, all the tools he'd use to manipulate senators and Jedi Masters alike. But as he settled into his seat, feeling the dark side swirl around him like a familiar cloak, Palpatine couldn't quite suppress the small voice of doubt whispering in the back of his mind. For the first time in decades, he might be facing someone he couldn't simply outmaneuver. The Imperial Palace rose from Coruscant's surface like a monument to absolute authority, a massive structure of dark stone and polished metal that dominated the surrounding cityscape. Once it had been the Jedi Temple, a beacon of hope and light. Now it served as the beating heart of tyranny, converted and corrupted to house the Empire's ultimate power. The Lambda shuttle descended through layers of air traffic, cutting through streams of speeders and cargo haulers with Imperial priority codes that cleared its path instantly. Anos observed the city planet below with growing interest, his crimson eyes reflecting the endless lights of a world that had paved over every centimeter of natural landscape. Impressive, he admitted. An entire planet transformed into a single city. The logistics alone must be staggering: food production, waste management, atmospheric processing. Your civilization has mastered large-scale engineering. Coruscant has been the galactic capital for over 1,000 generations, Vader replied, guiding the shuttle toward the palace's private landing bay. It is the center of all Imperial authority. And before the Empire? The Republic. And before that, other governments stretching back to the dawn of recorded history. Power has always resided here. Anos nodded thoughtfully. So this is a world defined by political dominance rather than natural strength. Interesting. In my world, the Demon King's castle stood as the most powerful location because I was there, not because of historical precedent. The shuttle touched down in a vast hangar bay lined with hundreds of stormtroopers standing at perfect attention. TIE fighters hung from overhead racks like sleeping predators. Weapons emplacements tracked the shuttle's movement with mechanical precision, ready to unleash devastating firepower at the slightest provocation. Anos stepped onto the landing ramp and paused, surveying the assembled military might with an expression of mild amusement. Your Emperor certainly enjoys displays of force, he observed. All these soldiers, all these weapons, none of which could actually harm me, but visually impressive nonetheless. It's almost endearing, like a child showing off their toy collection. Every stormtrooper stiffened at the casual dismissal, but none moved. Their orders were clear: observe only, do not engage unless commanded. Vader descended the ramp after Anos, his presence commanding immediate deference from the assembled troops. The Emperor is prepared to receive you in the throne room. Follow me. They walked through corridors of polished obsidian and blood-red carpeting, passing chamber after chamber filled with Imperial officials who stopped to stare at the silver-haired stranger walking beside Lord Vader. Whispers followed in their wake: who was this being that warranted a personal escort from the Empire's enforcer? Anos paid them little attention, more interested in the architecture and the subtle energy signatures woven throughout the palace. Dark side energy permeated every stone, every surface, accumulated over decades of Sith occupation. It was like walking through a place physically saturated with malevolent intent. Your Emperor has certainly made his mark on this building, Anos commented. The entire structure resonates with his power signature. A territorial assertion, perhaps. Marking his domain like a predator marks its hunting grounds. The Emperor's connection to the dark side is unmatched, Vader said, a note of warning in his mechanical voice. You would be wise to show appropriate respect. I show respect to those who earn it through strength and character, Anos replied calmly. Titles and displays of power are meaningless without substance to support them. I've destroyed gods who demanded worship. I'll treat your Emperor as I treat everyone else, according to what he demonstrates, not what he claims. They reached a pair of massive doors 20 meters tall, adorned with Imperial symbols and flanked by royal guards in crimson armor. The guards' weapons, force pikes crackling with energy, crossed in front of the entrance. Then, with perfect synchronization, they separated, and the doors began to open. The throne room beyond was a study in calculated intimidation. A long approach stretched toward a raised platform where Emperor Palpatine sat upon his throne, backlit by viewports that showed the endless cityscape of Coruscant. The lighting was deliberately dim, pools of shadow alternating with strategic illumination designed to make visitors feel exposed and vulnerable. More royal guards lined the walls, at least 24 of them, the Emperor's personal elite. The air itself felt heavy with dark side energy, thick enough to make normal beings feel nauseous and afraid. Anos walked forward without hesitation, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. He showed no signs of discomfort, no reaction to the oppressive atmosphere that had broken stronger beings than him. Palpatine watched him approach, using every sense at his disposal, mundane and force-enhanced, to assess this intruder. What he found disturbed him more than he'd anticipated. The being appeared young, perhaps 20 standard years, with aristocratic features and an almost casual confidence. But appearances meant nothing. Through the Force, Palpatine could sense the vast gulf where this being's presence should have been. It was like looking at a hole in reality shaped like a person. More troubling were the glimpses he caught at the edges of perception, fragments of impossible power, abilities that shouldn't exist, and beneath it all, the sense of something ancient beyond measure wearing a youthful face. Anos stopped at what he judged to be an appropriate conversational distance, close enough to speak clearly, far enough to avoid appearing either submissive or aggressive. He studied the Emperor with open curiosity. The being before him was old, ravaged by the very power he wielded. The dark side energy had corrupted his physical form, leaving him withered and scarred. Yet beneath that ruined exterior was genuine power, significant by this galaxy's standards, though laughably weak by Anos's own. Emperor Palpatine, I presume, Anos said, his tone polite but devoid of deference. I am Anos Voldigoad, formerly the Demon King of Tyranny. I've recently arrived in your galaxy and found it sufficiently interesting to explore further. Palpatine's lips curled into a smile that held no warmth. Welcome, Lord Voldigoad. Your arrival has caused quite a disturbance. My instruments detected a spatial anomaly of unprecedented magnitude above Mustafar. Tell me, was your entrance into our reality intentional? Partially, Anos admitted. I was experimenting with dimensional travel using my sword Venus de Noah. It has certain properties that allow it to cut through the barriers between worlds. Your galaxy's unique energy signature, this force of yours, created an interesting resonance that drew me here. Fascinating. Palpatine leaned forward slightly. And now that you're here, what are your intentions? Surely a being of your evident power has some purpose beyond mere tourism. Anos considered the question carefully. I seek entertainment, primarily. In my own world, I had grown bored with constant conflict. My enemies were either too weak to provide challenge or too similar to previous opponents. A new reality with different power systems and unfamiliar warriors seemed like an ideal opportunity for stimulation. You seek battle? Palpatine's yellow eyes gleamed. How refreshingly honest. Most beings cloak their violent intentions in nobler justifications. But you seem to embrace what you are without pretense. I see no point in deception, Anos replied. I am what I am, a warrior who has reached the pinnacle of power and now searches for meaning beyond mere dominance. In my world, I was called a tyrant, and the title was accurate. But even tyrants can grow weary of unchallenged authority. Palpatine rose from his throne, leaning heavily on his cane as he descended the steps toward Anos. Vader tensed, ready to intervene if necessary, but the Emperor waved him back. I understand your position perfectly, Palpatine said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. The burden of supreme power is isolation. When none can stand against you, existence becomes hollow. But perhaps I can offer you something more interesting than random conflict. Oh. Anos raised an eyebrow, genuinely curious where this was leading. The galaxy is vast, Lord Voldigoad. Millions of inhabited systems, countless species, and more threats than even the Empire can fully contain. Rebel insurgents, criminal cartels, remnant Jedi, and unknown dangers lurking in the Outer Rim. A being of your capabilities could find endless challenges, each unique and potentially worthy of your attention. Anos smiled, recognizing the manipulation for what it was. You're offering to point me at your enemies like a weapon. How pragmatic. But what makes you think I'd serve another's interests rather than pursuing my own? Palpatine's smile widened, showing teeth. Because serving my interests and pursuing your own need not be mutually exclusive. I seek order and control. You seek worthy opponents. The rebels hiding in their secret bases, the Jedi survivors plotting in the shadows, the crime lords who fancy themselves beyond Imperial authority, all of them represent challenges that might actually test someone of your unique abilities. And in exchange for targeting your enemies, you provide me with information and resources? Precisely. Think of it as a mutually beneficial arrangement between equals. The word equals was delivered with just the right mixture of flattery and sincerity, though Palpatine's mind was already calculating how to turn this being into a controllable asset. Anos was silent for a long moment, appearing to consider the offer. In truth, he was reading the layers of manipulation, the obvious lies, and the genuine desperation beneath Palpatine's controlled exterior. This Emperor feared him, as he should, but was skilled enough to channel that fear into calculated strategy. Interesting. I'll consider your proposition, Anos said finally. But understand this, Emperor, I bow to no one. If I choose to engage your enemies, it will be because I find them interesting, not because you commanded it. And if you attempt to manipulate or control me as you clearly do with your subordinates. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The temperature in the throne room dropped 10 degrees, and every royal guard felt their weapons grow suddenly, impossibly heavy in their hands. I will remind you of the difference between true power and political authority. Palpatine's smile never wavered, but his knuckles whitened around his cane. Of course, Lord Voldigoad. I would expect nothing less from someone of your evident stature. Consider yourself an honored guest of the Empire. Lord Vader will arrange suitable accommodations and provide you with any information you require. Generous of you. Anos turned to leave, then paused. Oh, an Emperor. You might want to reconsider how you treat your subordinates. Deliberately crippling Lord Vader to ensure his dependence is unworthy of someone claiming supreme authority. True strength comes from elevating those beneath you, not limiting them. The throne room fell silent. No one spoke to the Emperor this way. No one dared question his methods or criticize his rule. Palpatine's expression didn't change, but something dark and ancient flickered in his yellow eyes. Your concern is noted, Lord Voldigoad. Though I would suggest you don't fully understand the complexities of maintaining order across a galaxy. Perhaps not, Anos agreed cheerfully. But I understand power. And yours, while impressive by local standards, is built on foundations of fear rather than genuine strength. That's a weakness waiting to be exploited. He walked toward the exit, leaving Palpatine standing frozen on the steps of his throne, Vader uncertain whether to follow, and every guard in the room suddenly aware that the most dangerous being in the galaxy had just casually insulted the Emperor and walked away unscathed. As the doors closed behind Anos, Palpatine slowly returned to his throne, his mind racing with possibilities, contingencies, and the uncomfortable realization that for the first time in his long life, he might be facing something he couldn't manipulate, couldn't corrupt, and couldn't destroy. The luxury suite Vader arranged for Anos occupied an entire level of the Imperial Palace's guest quarters, chambers normally reserved for visiting diplomats and planetary governors who'd earned the Emperor's favor. Floor-to-ceiling windows provided a panoramic view of Coruscant's endless cityscape, millions of lights stretching to every horizon like a sea of artificial stars. Anos stood at the window, hands clasped behind his back, observing the constant flow of traffic through the planet's airways. Speeders, cargo haulers, passenger transports, all moving in carefully regulated patterns that spoke of a civilization utterly dependent on technological infrastructure. Interesting, he murmured. A world where nature has been completely subjugated. I wonder what happens when the systems fail. Behind him, a holographic display activated without being touched, projecting Imperial propaganda, images of order, strength, and unity under Palpatine's rule. Anos glanced at it with mild amusement before waving his hand dismissively. The hologram flickered and died, along with every other surveillance device hidden throughout the suite. Privacy established, he settled into a chair and closed his eyes, extending his senses outward to truly explore this galaxy for the first time. The Force was everywhere, as he'd suspected, a universal energy that connected all living things in an intricate web. But unlike the magical systems of his own world, which could be dominated through superior will, the Force operated on principles of balance and connection. It didn't respond to commands so much as suggestions, requiring harmony rather than dominance. How quaint! More interesting were the concentrations of power scattered across the galaxy. Thousands of Force-sensitive beings, most weak and untrained, but a few that registered as genuinely noteworthy. The Emperor's presence burned like a dark star on Coruscant itself, but there were others. Distant lights of varying intensity hidden on remote worlds. And then there was something else. Something that made Anos pause. Deep in the Force, beneath the surface currents of light and dark, was an older presence. Not a being, exactly, but an echo of ancient power that predated the current galactic civilization. It reminded him of the primordial forces in his own world, entities that existed before the gods, before demons, before the current order of things. Now that's interesting, Anos said aloud, opening his eyes. This galaxy has deeper history than its current inhabitants realize. A chime at his door interrupted his contemplation. Anos didn't need to enhance his senses to know who it was. Vader's presence was unmistakable, a mixture of dark side power and mechanical augmentation. Enter. The door hissed open, and Vader stepped inside, moving with slightly more fluidity than before. The partial healing Anos had granted him was holding, though the Sith Lord clearly remained uncomfortable with this unsolicited improvement. The Emperor has assigned me to serve as your liaison, Vader said, his tone suggesting this was a duty rather than an honor. If you require anything, you need only ask. How generous. And also convenient for surveillance purposes, I imagine. Anos gestured to a chair. Sit. I have questions, and you strike me as someone who values directness over political maneuvering. Vader remained standing. I serve the Emperor. Any information I provide serves Imperial interests. Naturally. But answer me this, Lord Vader, and I use your title as you seem to prefer it, how did you become what you are? That armor, those injuries, the deliberate limitations built into your life support systems. Was this your choice, or were you remade against your will? The question hit like a physical blow. Vader's respirator hissed irregularly, and his hands clenched into fists. No one asked him such things. No one dared speak of his transformation as anything but a necessary adaptation. That information is not relevant to your stay here, Vader said coldly. Isn't it? Anos leaned forward, his crimson eyes piercing. I've been in this galaxy less than a day, and already I've noticed something peculiar. Your Emperor surrounds himself with the broken, the damaged, the deliberately limited. His Inquisitors are failed Jedi, their power stunted. His royal guards are trained to absolute obedience. And you, his most powerful servant, are kept in a constant state of pain and dependence. The Emperor's wisdom is beyond your understanding. Perhaps. Or perhaps he's simply terrified of what you might become if you were whole. Anos stood, moving to the window. In my world, I was called a tyrant. The title was earned, I ruled with absolute power and crushed all opposition. But I never feared my subordinates growing stronger. I encouraged it. The mightier my followers became, the greater my kingdom's strength. He turned to face Vader directly. Your Emperor does the opposite. He keeps you weak not to protect the Empire, but to protect himself. That's not the action of a supreme ruler, that's paranoia masquerading as strategy. You know nothing of the Emperor's vision, Vader growled, but there was less conviction in his voice than before. I know that you hate him, Anos said simply. I can see it beneath the loyalty, beneath the discipline. You serve because you believe you have no choice, because the pain reminds you of your failures, because the alternative seems worse than obedience. But tell me, Vader, what would you do if you were free? The question hung in the air between them, dangerous and seductive. Vader's mind flashed to forbidden thoughts, Padme, the Jedi Order, the path not taken. Then reality reasserted itself, and he pushed the thoughts down with practiced efficiency. This conversation is over, Vader said, turning toward the door. One more question. Vader said, turning toward the door. One more question, Anos called out, stopping him. Does your Emperor have enemies? Real ones, not the rebels and criminals he mentioned. Beings of genuine power who might actually pose a threat to him. Vader paused at the doorway. For a moment, he seemed to war with himself, loyalty to Palpatine versus the opportunity to direct this being toward potentially problematic targets. There are legends, Vader said finally. Ancient Sith artifacts scattered across the galaxy. Holocrons containing the knowledge of Dark Lords who preceded the rule of two. The Emperor has spent decades hunting them down, destroying most, keeping a few for study. He fears what might happen if someone else found them first. Fears knowledge. How interesting. Anos smiled. And where might one find these artifacts? I will not help you undermine Imperial interests. I'm not asking you to. I'm asking where a bored immortal might find genuinely interesting challenges in this galaxy. If these artifacts are powerful enough to worry your Emperor, they're powerful enough to interest me. Vader was silent for a long moment. Then, almost reluctantly, he said, Moraband. The ancient Sith homeworld. It's a graveyard of dark power, forbidden to all but the Emperor and his chosen agents. Tombs of the old Sith lords dot the surface, some dating back thousands of years. Perfect. Anos's smile widened. I think I'll visit this Moraband. Experience your galaxy's history firsthand. The Emperor will not permit it. Then he's welcome to try stopping me. Anos moved toward the door, then paused. One last thing, Vader. Consider what I said about your limitations. You're stronger than you realize, you've simply been convinced otherwise. If you ever decide you want to discover your true potential, find me. I have no use for broken servants, but I respect powerful warriors. He left before Vader could respond, striding through the palace corridors with the confidence of someone who knew no one would dare stop him. Vader stood alone in the empty suite, his mind churning with dangerous thoughts. The partial healing Anos had granted him was a constant reminder of what he'd lost, what had been taken from him. For years, he'd accepted his limitations as the price of his failures. But what if they weren't necessary? What if the Emperor had deliberately kept him weak? The thought was treason. The thought was freedom. Vader crushed it ruthlessly and returned to his duties, but the seed of doubt had been planted. In his private meditation chamber, deep within the palace's most secure levels, Emperor Palpatine floated cross-legged in mid-air, surrounded by swirling dark side energy. His consciousness stretched across the galaxy, touching the minds of his agents, feeling the pulse of Imperial power. And encountering a void where Anos Voldigoad stood. The being was moving through the palace toward the hangar bays, his presence an empty space in the force that drew attention precisely because it couldn't be perceived directly. Like trying to see a black hole, you could only observe it by watching what it affected around it. Palpatine had attempted to touch the being's mind earlier, using subtle force techniques refined over decades of manipulation. The result had been instructive. His power had simply slid off Anos's consciousness like water off impervious armor, unable to find purchase, unable to penetrate. It was as if the being existed in a completely different layer of reality, one the Force couldn't reach. That made him either the greatest threat Palpatine had ever faced or a potential weapon beyond measure. The key was determining which, and how to turn it to his advantage. He reached out through the Force, contacting Vader's mind across the distance. Lord Vader. Report. He asked about ancient Sith sites, Master. I told him of Moraband. Interesting. Palpatine's lips curled into a smile. Did he now? And did you tell him that Moraband's tombs are filled with traps designed to kill anyone but a Sith Lord? That the dark side energies there are potent enough to drive lesser beings insane? No, Master. He did not ask for warnings. Excellent. Let him go to Moraband. Let him face the accumulated darkness of 1,000 Sith Lords. If he survives, we'll know his power is genuine. If he doesn't, Palpatine's smile widened. Then the problem solves itself. He severed the connection and returned to his meditation, already calculating the next moves. Anos Voldigoad was dangerous, yes, but Palpatine had manipulated dangerous beings before. The key was finding their weakness, and everyone had one. The being claimed to seek entertainment, worthy opponents, challenges to relieve boredom. That suggested a psychology Palpatine could work with. Pride. Arrogance. The assumption that nothing in this galaxy could truly threaten him. And if that assumption proved correct? If Anos truly was beyond the Empire's ability to contain or control, then Palpatine would need to ensure the being's interests aligned with Imperial goals. Not through force manipulation, that was clearly impossible, but through more subtle means. Psychology. Calculated challenges. Perhaps even apparent camaraderie between powerful individuals. The Emperor had not conquered the galaxy by relying on power alone. He'd done it through patience, planning, and the ability to turn enemies into assets. Anos Voldigoad would be no different. In the depths of the meditation chamber, surrounded by darkness, Palpatine began to laugh, a sound like breaking glass and dying stars. The stolen Imperial shuttle broke through Moraband's atmosphere like a blade cutting through ancient shrouds. Anos had simply walked into the palace hangar, selected a shuttle that seemed serviceable, and departed, security forces parting instinctively before him, unable to muster the will to challenge his presence. Now, looking down at the planet below, he felt genuine interest for the first time since arriving in this galaxy. Moraband was a graveyard world. Rust-red desert stretched endlessly beneath a sky choked with dust and ash. Massive statues of forgotten Sith lords jutted from the landscape like broken teeth, their features eroded by millennia of wind and time. Lightning flickered between storm clouds that never seemed to fully break, casting everything in an eerie, pulsing glow. But it was the energy that truly caught Anos's attention. The dark side saturated this world so completely that it had physically altered reality. The very ground thrummed with accumulated malevolence, thousands of years of Sith ritual, battle, and dark power concentrated into a single planet. It was impressive in its own way, like visiting a monument to sustained hatred. Fascinating, Anos murmured as he guided the shuttle toward the largest concentration of dark energy, a valley filled with enormous tomb structures that dwarfed anything human scale. They've managed to imprint their essence onto physical reality. Crude, but effective. This planet will radiate dark power for millennia to come. The shuttle touched down on cracked stone between two towering monuments. Anos disembarked, breathing in air thick with dust and the psychic residue of ancient evil. Lesser beings would have been overwhelmed immediately. The dark side here was strong enough to corrupt minds, induce madness, and kill through sheer psychic pressure. Anos felt pleasantly refreshed, like walking into a room with ideal temperature. He approached the nearest tomb, a structure the size of a small mountain. Its entrance flanked by statues of armored warriors frozen in eternal vigilance. Ancient Sith script covered every surface, proclaiming the achievements and power of whoever lay entombed within. Lord Malgus, Anos read, his Demon King heritage allowing him to intuitively understand the dead language. Conqueror of the Republic, wielder of the dark side, immortalized in death. How theatrical. He walked through the entrance without hesitation, descending into darkness that would have been absolute for normal vision. Anos saw perfectly, his eyes adapting instantly to the absence of light. The tomb's interior was a masterwork of intimidation, corridors lined with skeletal remains, walls covered in horrific murals depicting battles and conquests, and trap mechanisms that had killed countless treasure hunters over the centuries. Pressure plates that triggered blade mechanisms, concealed blaster turrets powered by ancient but functional technology, and force-activated barriers designed to crush intruders. Anos triggered all of them simultaneously by walking forward at a steady pace. Blades shattered against his skin. Blaster bolts dissipated before reaching him. Force barriers simply ceased to exist in his immediate vicinity. The tomb's defenses, designed to kill even Jedi Masters, were no more effective than theatrical props. At the heart of the tomb, he found what he'd come seeking, a Sith holocron, floating above a pedestal and radiating dark power. The device was a pyramid of crimson crystal, its internal mechanisms visible as glowing circuitry. Dark side energy pulsed from it in waves, and Anos could sense the presence within, a fragment of consciousness, preserved beyond death. He reached for it without ceremony, his hand closing around the warm crystal. Immediately, the presence within struck, attempting to dominate his mind, to corrupt his thoughts, to bend him to the will of a Sith Lord dead for 3,000 years. Dark side energy crashed against Anos's consciousness like a tsunami against an immovable cliff. Anos smiled. Aggressive. I like that. Come, Ancient One. Show me what you've learned in 3 millennia of contemplation. The holocron flared with crimson light, and the presence within manifested as a translucent figure, a tall warrior in Sith armor, face twisted with rage and dark power. Who dares disturb my eternal rest? The voice boomed, echoing with force-enhanced authority. You will become my vessel, foolish intruder. Your body will house my consciousness, and I shall rise again too. No, Anos said simply. The possession attempt stopped dead, like a charging warrior running into an invisible wall. The Sith Lord's projection flickered with confusion. What are you? I cannot penetrate your mind. The dark side finds no purchase in your soul. You exist outside the Force itself. Correct, Anos confirmed, examining the holocron with interest. I am Anos Voldigoad, from a reality beyond your galaxy. Your dark side is fascinating, but ultimately limited. You've built your entire philosophy around a binary, light and dark, always in conflict. Where I come from, power simply is. It doesn't require moral classification. The Sith Lord's projection solidified, genuine curiosity replacing the attempted domination. You speak heresy against the fundamental nature of the Force. Yet I sense you speak truth. You are, beyond such limitations. How is this possible? Because I transcend the rules that govern your reality, Anos explained. In my world, I destroyed gods who claimed ultimate authority. I rewrote the laws of magic itself when they proved inconvenient. Your force is powerful within its context, but it's still bound by conceptual limitations. Fascinating. The Sith Lord's anger had transformed into scholarly interest. In 3,000 years of death, I have encountered countless beings through this holocron. Jedi who sought to destroy me, Sith who sought my knowledge, treasure hunters who fled screaming. But never someone who simply existed outside the paradigm entirely. Tell me about your philosophy, Anos said, settling onto the tomb floor as if visiting an old friend. This rule of two that limits your successors. The constant struggle between apprentice and master. Why structure yourselves around inevitable betrayal? The projection sat as well, a ghost discussing philosophy with an impossible being. Because power through conflict refines the Sith. Each generation must be stronger than the last, or they don't deserve to survive. Stagnation is death. Only through struggle do we evolve. I disagree, Anos said mildly. Constant internal conflict wastes resources that could be directed externally. When I ruled as Demon King, I encouraged my subordinates to grow stronger, not to overthrow me, but to elevate my kingdom as a whole. Unity of purpose doesn't require weakness, it requires confidence in your own unassailable position. And if your subordinates eventually surpassed you? Anos's smile was genuinely amused. Impossible. But if somehow it occurred, I would celebrate having raised someone worthy of succession. Legacy matters more than eternal dominance. What use is immortal rule if your civilization crumbles the moment you're gone? The Sith Lord was silent for a moment, processing this radically different philosophy. You speak like someone who has already conquered death itself. Who has nothing left to prove. Accurate. I died once, was reincarnated 2,000 years later, and reclaimed everything I'd built within months. Death is an inconvenience, not an ending. Which is why I find your Sith obsession with immortality somewhat quaint. Quaint. The projection flickered with indignation. I achieved what few Sith ever could, preservation of consciousness beyond physical death. My knowledge, my power, my essence endures while the galaxy changes around me. And yet you're trapped in a crystal, unable to interact with the living world except through attempted possession. You call that immortality? I call it a very elaborate prison. Anos stood, dusting off his clothes. Still, your perspective is valuable. This tomb contains knowledge of your era, correct? Wars, force techniques, the state of the galaxy 3,000 years ago. Yes. Everything I knew is encoded within this holocron. But accessing it requires attunement to the dark side, submission to my will. Anos simply looked at the holocron, and information flooded into his mind. 3,000 years of history, Sith techniques refined over centuries, battle strategies, force philosophy, and the accumulated knowledge of a civilization at war with itself. The Sith Lord's projection stared in disbelief. That's impossible. You simply took the information without ritual, without force connection, without following your reality's rules, Anos finished. Yes. I find rules limiting. He placed the holocron back on its pedestal gently. Thank you for the conversation, Ancient One. You've provided valuable context about this galaxy's history. Wait, the projection said urgently. You're just leaving. Not claiming the holocron. Not seeking to master its power. I don't need it, Anos said simply. I've already learned what I wanted. Though I'll offer you this, your philosophy of constant betrayal and conflict has led your successors to near extinction. The current Sith Lord, Palpatine, rules alone with a crippled apprentice he keeps deliberately weak. That's what your rule of two has produced, paranoia masquerading as strength. The Sith Lord's projection dimmed with something like sorrow. Then we have failed. The Sith were meant to grow stronger with each generation, not weaker. Perhaps. Or perhaps your philosophy contains a fundamental flaw: you can't build lasting power on a foundation of inevitable betrayal. Anos walked toward the tomb's exit, then paused. For what it's worth, your dedication to your ideals is admirable, even if I disagree with them. You've earned a warrior's respect. The projection seemed to straighten with surprised pride. That means more than you know. Go, anomaly from beyond. Show this galaxy what exists outside its narrow definitions of power. Anos emerged from the tomb into the rust-red sunlight of Moraband, his mind processing the wealth of information he'd acquired. The ancient Sith had provided crucial context. This galaxy had been locked in light versus dark conflict for millennia, each side convinced of its moral superiority, neither recognizing that the rigid duality itself was the true limitation. He could sense other tombs calling out, other preserved consciousnesses eager for contact with the living world. But he'd learned what he needed. More importantly, he'd confirmed something he'd suspected since arriving. This galaxy's greatest weakness wasn't military, technological, or even philosophical. It was psychological. They'd been conditioned by the Force itself to think in binary terms. Light and dark. Good and evil. Order and chaos. They couldn't conceive of something that existed outside that framework entirely. Which meant the Emperor, despite his cunning and power, was operating with a critical blind spot. He'd attempt to categorize Anos as either ally or enemy, tool or threat, light side or dark side. He'd never consider the possibility of something that was none of those things. Anos looked up at the storm-racked sky, feeling the dark side energy swirling around him like curious predators unsure whether to attack or flee. I think, he said to no one in particular, that I'm going to enjoy my stay in this galaxy after all. Behind him, in the depths of the tomb, the ancient Sith Lord's holocron pulsed with a final thought before returning to dormancy: what have we unleashed upon the galaxy? On Coruscant, Emperor Palpatine felt a disturbance through the Force, not a threat, exactly, but a shift. Something had changed on Moraband. Someone had walked through his most carefully guarded secrets and emerged not corrupted, not broken, but educated. His hands tightened on his throne's armrests. For the first time in decades, Palpatine realized he might have made a serious miscalculation. The Rebel Alliance base on Yavin 4 hummed with controlled chaos, pilots preparing fighters, intelligence officers analyzing Imperial transmissions, and mechanics working around the clock to maintain equipment held together through ingenuity and desperation. It was a far cry from the Republic's former glory, but it represented something Palpatine's empire could never truly extinguish: hope. In the command center, Mon Mothma stood before a holographic display showing Imperial fleet movements, her composed features betraying none of the exhaustion she felt. Beside her, General Jan Dodonna studied tactical reports while a young Princess Leia Organa reviewed supply manifests. Imperial activity near Coruscant has increased significantly, Dodonna observed, highlighting a sector of the map. Star destroyers repositioning, unusual communication patterns. Something has their attention. Or someone, Leia added, her sharp mind already working through possibilities. Our agents on Coruscant report strange rumors. A stranger arrived at the Imperial Palace days ago, walked right through security, met with the Emperor himself, and left unharmed. Mon Mothma's eyebrow raised slightly. That's unprecedented. Do we have any identification? None. But witnesses describe someone young, with silver hair and unusual clothing. He requisitioned an Imperial shuttle without authorization and departed for Moraband. Leia's expression was troubled. The Emperor let him go. Palpatine doesn't let anyone defy him, Dodonna said grimly. If this person left alive after such actions, either the Emperor Wants him free for some purpose, or he couldn't stop him, Leia finished quietly. The three leaders exchanged glances heavy with implications. An individual who could walk through Imperial security, meet the Emperor as an equal, and depart without consequence was either the greatest threat or the greatest opportunity the rebellion had encountered. We need more information, Mon Mothma decided. Leia, take a small reconnaissance team to Moraband. Stay hidden, observe only. If this stranger represents a potential ally, we need to know. If he's another threat, we need to know that too, Leia agreed. I'll take Luke and Captain Solo. The Falcon is fast enough to escape if things go wrong. Be careful. Moraband is a graveyard for good reasons. Anos had spent 3 days exploring Moraband's tombs, and his assessment of the Sith philosophy had only grown more complex. Each holocron he'd encountered contained fragments of ancient consciousness, some genuinely wise, others consumed by madness or hatred, all of them trapped in crystalline prisons of their own making. The pattern was consistent: powerful individuals who'd sought immortality through the dark side, only to discover that preserving consciousness without a living body was a hollow victory. They could observe, could share knowledge with those who found them, but couldn't truly act. They were ghosts clinging to relevance in a galaxy that had moved on without them. It was simultaneously tragic and instructive. He sat now atop the largest tomb structure, a monument to an ancient Dark Lord whose name had been weathered away by time, watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of crimson and shadow. The dark side energy was particularly strong at dusk, as if the dying light triggered some resonance in the accumulated evil below. His demonic senses detected the approaching ship before it entered visual range. Small, fast, with an unusual energy signature that didn't match standard Imperial designs. Rebels, then. How interesting. Anos made no effort to hide as the Millennium Falcon descended, landing a respectful distance away. He watched with mild curiosity as the boarding ramp lowered and 3 figures emerged. The first was a young woman, early 20s, dressed practically but with an unmistakable air of authority. Leadership came naturally to her. Anos could see it in her posture, the way she surveyed the terrain before committing to approach. The second was younger, barely out of adolescence, with blonde hair and earnest eyes that marked him as dangerously naive. But there was something else, a latent power, raw and untrained, that resonated with this galaxy's force. Strong potential, completely undeveloped. The third was older, cynical, armed with a blaster and body language that screamed, suspicious of everything. A smuggler, Anos guessed, someone who'd learned to trust nothing and survived by that philosophy. Princess Leia Organa, Luke Skywalker, and Han Solo, though Anos didn't know their names yet. To him, they were simply interesting specimens of this galaxy's resistance movement. That's him, Leia whispered, her macrobinoculars focused on Anos's distant figure. He matches the descriptions exactly. Sitting on top of a Sith tomb like it's a park bench, Han muttered. Either he's insane or he's something we really don't want to mess with. Luke's hand drifted unconsciously toward his lightsaber, the weapon he'd barely begun learning to use. I can feel him through the Force. Or rather, I can't. It's like there's nothing there, but that's wrong somehow. Ben never taught me about anything like this. Ben's dead, Han said bluntly, though not unkindly. And we're about to approach someone who scares the Empire. Remind me why this was a good idea. Because we need to know whose side he's on, Leia said firmly. If there's even a chance he might oppose the Empire, we have to try making contact. She started forward before either man could argue, her diplomatic training taking over. Anos watched her approach with open curiosity, making no move to descend from his perch or otherwise acknowledge the potential threat. When she was close enough for comfortable conversation, Leia stopped and looked up at the figure silhouetted against the rust-red sky. I am Leia Organa of Alderaan, she called out, her voice carrying clearly in the still desert air. We've heard interesting reports about you from Coruscant. I was hoping we might talk. Anos tilted his head, studying her. You're bold, walking into a graveyard of dark power to speak with a stranger. Either very brave or very foolish. Possibly both. Bravery and foolishness are often indistinguishable until after the fact, Leia replied smoothly. May I ask your name? Anos Voldigoad. He stood with fluid grace and stepped off the tomb's edge, descending 30 meters in a controlled fall that should have been impossible. He landed softly beside the three rebels, completely unharmed. And before you ask, no, that's not a Force technique. I simply exist outside your galaxy's rules. Han's hand had moved to his blaster the moment Anos jumped, but he hadn't drawn. Something in his survival instincts warned that weapons would be useless against this being. Smart, Anos observed, noting the gesture. You recognize when you're outmatched. That's a useful survival trait. He turned his attention to Luke. And you're Force sensitive. Untrained, raw potential, recently awakened. Interesting. Are you the one who destroyed the Empire's battle station? Luke blinked in surprise. How did you? Your energy signature is splashed across half the galaxy. The Force itself seems interested in you. Anos smiled. Don't worry, I'm not here to harm you. I'm simply observing. Learning about this reality and its conflicts. Leia stepped forward, drawing Anos's attention back to her. If you're not aligned with the Empire, perhaps we could help each other. The Rebel Alliance fights to restore freedom to the galaxy. If you oppose Palpatine. I don't oppose him, Anos interrupted. Nor do I support him. Your galactic politics are not my concern. Then what is your concern? Leia's tone sharpened slightly. You traveled across realities just to be neutral. Anos laughed, a genuine sound of amusement. I like you. Direct, intelligent, unwilling to accept dismissive answers. Very well, I'll explain. He gestured to the tombs around them. I came seeking entertainment. My own world had grown boring, too easy, too predictable. This galaxy offered something different, new power systems, unfamiliar warriors, conflicts I hadn't seen before. Entertainment? Han interjected, his voice dripping with disbelief. People are dying in this war. Planets are being destroyed. The Empire enslaves entire species. And you're treating it like a spectator sport? Yes, Anos said without shame or apology. I am immortal, immeasurably powerful, and have already saved my own world countless times. I've earned the right to pursue my own interests. If that offends your moral sensibilities, that's unfortunate but irrelevant. Luke's hand had fully moved to his lightsaber now, anger coloring his Force presence. How can you be so callous? Innocent people are suffering. And they will continue to suffer regardless of my intervention, Anos said calmly. Your rebellion fights the Empire. If you win, the Empire becomes the rebellion. Different names, same patterns of conflict. Civilizations rise and fall in cycles. I've seen it countless times across millennia. Your suffering is tragic to you, but from my perspective, it's just another iteration of eternal patterns. That's a coward's philosophy, Leia said coldly. Justifying inaction by claiming it doesn't matter. Anos's expression shifted, not to anger, but to something more dangerous. For the first time, the three rebels felt the full weight of his presence, like standing before something vast and ancient wearing a human shape. Careful, princess. I respect directness, but I am not your ally, and I do not tolerate insults from those who know nothing of me. The pressure vanished as quickly as it appeared. However, you raise a valid point. Perhaps I am using philosophical distance to justify my entertainment. An honest criticism. He began walking toward the Falcon, forcing them to follow. Tell me about your rebellion. Not propaganda or recruitment speeches, truth. What do you actually hope to accomplish, and how do you plan to achieve it? Leia exchanged glances with Han and Luke, then decided to be honest. We want to end the Empire's tyranny and restore democratic government. The Republic had its flaws, but people had representation, rights, freedom. Palpatine destroyed all that. And you think killing him will restore what was lost? It's a start, Han said. Cut off the head, the body dies. Incorrect, Anos said. Cut off the head, the body fractures into competing factions, each claiming legitimate succession. You'll trade one tyrant for dozens of warlords, all fighting for control of the power vacuum. He'd seen it happen in his own world multiple times. Unless you have legitimate governmental infrastructure ready to assume authority immediately, you'll trigger a galactic civil war that makes the current conflict look gentle. The three rebels fell silent, because he wasn't wrong. They discussed this problem endlessly. What comes after victory? How do you rebuild when the entire governmental apparatus has been corrupted or destroyed? So what would you do? Luke asked, genuine curiosity overtaking his anger. Anos considered the question seriously. If I wanted to overthrow your emperor, I'd kill him, obviously. Then I'd personally hold power until stable governance could be established, perhaps a decade or two. I'd eliminate any Imperial officers who committed atrocities, reform the rest, and use their administrative experience to maintain order during the transition. I'd establish clear laws, enforce them consistently, and gradually transfer power to elected representatives once the population was ready. Benevolent dictatorship transitioning to democracy, Leia said thoughtfully. It's theoretically sound. But it requires a dictator who genuinely intends to relinquish power eventually. History suggests that rarely happens. True. Which is why it would require someone who doesn't want power for its own sake. Anos stopped at the Falcon's boarding ramp. Someone like me, who finds ruling tedious and would happily hand off administrative duties the moment competent alternatives exist. But you just said you weren't going to intervene, Han pointed out. I'm not. I'm merely answering hypothetical questions. Anos smiled. Your rebellion is not my responsibility. If you want to topple the Empire, do it yourselves. Earn your victory rather than waiting for a powerful outsider to solve your problems. Leia's jaw tightened, but she recognized the logic. A victory handed to them wouldn't mean anything, wouldn't give them the legitimacy or experience needed to govern afterward. However, Anos continued, I will offer you this, I'm going to test myself against the Empire's strongest forces. Not to help you, but because they represent the most interesting challenges this galaxy currently offers. If my actions happen to benefit your rebellion incidentally, he shrugged. Consider it a fortunate coincidence. Why tell us this? Luke asked suspiciously. Because I respect honesty, and you've earned honest answers in return. Anos turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and young Force user. Find proper training. Your potential is significant, but raw power without discipline is just waiting to explode destructively. The Force isn't a tool you wield, it's a relationship you develop. Respect it, and it will serve you well. He walked away into the desert, his form gradually obscured by rising dust devils that seemed to part instinctively around him. The three rebels stood in silence for a long moment. Well, Han finally said, that was. I don't even know what that was. That, Leia said quietly, was the most dangerous being I've ever met. And I've faced Darth Vader. Luke was still processing Anos's advice about the Force. It had sounded almost like something Ben Kenobi might have said, but from a completely different philosophical framework. What do we tell Mon Mothma? Han asked. Leia thought carefully before answering. The truth. There's a being of immense power loose in the galaxy who won't help us but might inadvertently harm the Empire. We should stay clear of him and hope his entertainment disrupts Imperial operations more than ours. As the Falcon lifted off, leaving Moraband behind, none of them noticed the slight smile on Anos's face or the way he watched their departure with genuine interest. Interesting, he murmured. Very interesting indeed. Perhaps this galaxy has more potential than I initially thought. The game was becoming complex, and Anos was beginning to enjoy it. The Imperial Star Destroyer Executor, Darth Vader's personal flagship and the largest warship in the Empire's arsenal, hung in orbit above the industrial world of Fonder like a predator surveying its domain. 5 kilometers of advanced weaponry and military might, it represented the Empire's absolute authority made manifest. Inside the command bridge, Vader stood before the viewport, his respirator hissing steadily as he contemplated the impossible situation he found himself in. 3 days ago, Anos Voldigoad had returned from Moraband and promptly declared his intention to test the Empire's military capabilities. Not as an attack, not as rebellion, as entertainment. He'd broadcast the challenge on open Imperial channels, inviting anyone who considered themselves strong to face him in combat. The Emperor had been furious. Admirals had scrambled to respond. And Vader had been ordered to lead the Empire's response personally. Now, according to sensors that kept malfunctioning and recalibrating, Anos stood in open space between the Executor and Fonder's orbital shipyards. No spacesuit, no ship, no visible life support, just a figure floating in hard vacuum as if it were the most natural thing in the galaxy. Lord Vader, Admiral Piatt reported, his voice carefully controlled despite the impossibility of what his sensors were showing. The intruder is hailing us. Audio only. Put it through. Anos's voice filled the bridge, clear and cheerful despite the void of space. Greetings, Lord Vader. I trust the Emperor received my message. I'm ready for my first proper challenge in this galaxy. I thought we'd start with something simple. Let's see how your warship performs against an opponent who doesn't follow conventional physics. You challenge the entire Executor? Vader's mechanical voice carried a note of disbelief. That is suicide. Probably not, but I appreciate the concern. Shall we begin? I promise to limit myself. Wouldn't want to accidentally destroy your planet during our engagement. Vader's hands clenched. The Emperor's orders had been explicit: capture or kill the intruder using any means necessary. Demonstrate that the Empire's might was absolute, that no individual could stand against its military power. But Vader had seen what Anos could do. Had felt his presence, experienced his casual dismissal of Force abilities, and witnessed his complete disregard for conventional limitations. This would not end well. All batteries, Vader commanded. Target the intruder. Fire on my mark. Across the Executor's 5-kilometer hull, thousands of weapon systems powered up. Turbolasers capable of reducing cities to ash, ion cannons that could disable entire fleets, and point defense lasers designed to intercept starfighters, all of them trained on a single human-sized target floating in space. Mark. The Executor opened fire. Space itself seemed to ignite as concentrated energy lanced across the void. Enough firepower to destroy a battle fleet converged on Anos's position, the overlapping fields of fire creating a sphere of destruction that should have vaporized anything within it. The light show was spectacular. Officers on the bridge had to shield their eyes from the glare. Energy readings spiked off the charts. When the firing ceased and sensors recalibrated, Anos remained exactly where he'd been, completely unharmed. Impressive light show, his voice came through again. The coordination alone is remarkable, targeting that many weapons systems on a single point requires significant computational power. However, I think it's my turn now. He raised one hand, and reality seemed to bend around his fingers. One of the Executor's turbolaser batteries simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed, not exploded, it vanished as if the universe had collectively agreed it had never been there. The 500 crew members stationed in that section vanished with it, leaving only empty space where a weapons emplacement had stood moments before. Alarms screamed across the bridge. Damage control teams rushed to respond to a breach that wasn't technically a breach because there was nothing damaged, just absence where there should have been presence. That was a warning, Anos said calmly. I could do that to your entire ship, but that seems excessive for a first engagement. Shall we discuss terms, or should I continue demonstrating the futility of conventional warfare against someone who can erase matter from existence? Vader stood frozen, his tactical mind racing through scenarios and finding no viable options. They couldn't harm him. They couldn't escape. The Executor was powerful but slow, and Anos could apparently survive in space indefinitely. Surrender was unthinkable. But continuing the engagement would just result in more casualties. What do you want? Vader asked, his voice carefully controlled. Conversation, actually. May I come aboard? I promise not to erase anything else unless you fire on me again. Against every tactical instinct, against Imperial protocol, against common sense itself, Vader heard himself say, permission granted. Hangar Bay 7. Minutes later, Anos materialized in the hangar bay without using the airlock or any visible means of transport. One moment the bay was empty, the next he stood on the deck as if he'd always been there. Vader was waiting with a full complement of stormtroopers, not because he thought they'd be useful, but because appearances had to be maintained. The Emperor would be watching through the ship's internal sensors. Thank you for the warm reception, Anos said, gesturing to the assembled troops. Though we both know they're decorative rather than functional at this point. State your purpose, Vader demanded. The Emperor grows tired of your games. My purpose is simple, I'm establishing my position in this galaxy's power hierarchy. Your empire claims supreme authority. So I'm demonstrating that claim is conditional. Anos walked past the stormtroopers, who parted instinctively despite their training. But I'm not interested in conquest or rule. I simply want it understood that I operate outside Imperial jurisdiction. No one exists outside the Emperor's authority. Except me. And potentially others, if they had the power to enforce their independence. Anos stopped directly in front of Vader. Tell me, Lord Vader, if you had the power to stand against the Emperor, would you? If your chains could be broken, would you choose freedom or familiar servitude? The question hung in the air like a live grenade. Every stormtrooper on the deck remained rigidly still, knowing that what they were hearing was treasonous but unable to act against a being who just erased part of a star destroyer with a gesture. My loyalty to the Emperor is absolute, Vader said, but there was the slightest hesitation before the words. Is it loyalty, or is it lack of alternatives? Anos pressed. I offered to heal you fully back at the palace. The offer remains open. I could restore what Palpatine has kept deliberately broken, give you back everything you lost. The question is whether you'd have the courage to accept, knowing it would fundamentally change your relationship with your master. Vader's respirator hissed irregularly. The partial healing Anos had performed days ago had already altered him in subtle ways, less pain, slightly improved mobility, a reminder of what wholeness felt like. The temptation to accept full restoration was overwhelming. But accepting would be betrayal. Would be weakness. Would mean admitting that he'd tolerated unnecessary suffering out of some twisted sense of deserved punishment. Why do you care? Vader asked instead of answering. You claim not to involve yourself in galactic affairs, yet you offer to heal me, challenge the Empire, and ask questions designed to provoke rebellion. Because I'm curious, Anos said honestly. I've seen countless civilizations across my existence, and they follow patterns. Tyranny rises, tyranny falls, new systems emerge. What interests me is the individuals, their choices, their breaking points, their potential. You, Vader, are interesting. A powerful warrior deliberately crippled by his own master, choosing loyalty over liberation. I want to understand why. You wouldn't understand, Vader said quietly. You've never failed. Never fallen. Never lost everything that mattered. Anos's expression shifted, still composed, but something ancient and sad flickered in his crimson eyes. I have, actually. In my original timeline, I died protecting those I loved. When I was reincarnated 2,000 years later, everyone I'd known was dust. My kingdom had crumbled, my friends had perished, and my legacy had been twisted into fearful legends. I know loss, Vader. I simply chose not to let it define me. The honesty in those words hit harder than any force attack could have. Vader stood silently, processing the revelation that this seemingly invincible being had also experienced devastating failure. The difference between us, Anos continued, is that I rebuilt. I reclaimed my power, reformed my kingdom, and chose to grow beyond my trauma. You've allowed yours to become your identity. Let pain and loss transform you into someone who serves the architect of your suffering. Enough, Vader said, but without real force. What do you want from me? A decision, Anos replied simply. Continue as you are, powerful but leashed, capable but limited, serving a master who fears your potential. Or accept my offer, reclaim your full strength, and discover what you might become without artificial constraints. He turned toward the hangar exit. I'm not asking you to rebel. I'm not asking you to betray anyone. I'm simply offering you the choice that Palpatine has systematically denied you, the freedom to be whole. He paused at the doorway. Consider it carefully, Vader. I'll remain in this galaxy for a while longer, testing myself, learning, experiencing what this reality has to offer. If you decide you want true freedom rather than comfortable chains, find me. I respect warriors too much to watch them waste their potential. Then he vanished, simply ceasing to exist in the hangar bay without any visible transition. Vader stood alone except for the stormtroopers, his mind churning with dangerous thoughts. Through the Force, he could feel Palpatine's distant attention, his master's consciousness probing for any sign of wavering loyalty. He buried the temptation deep, locked it behind walls of discipline and duty. But he couldn't entirely suppress the question that echoed in his thoughts. What if? On Coruscant, Palpatine sat in his throne room, trembling with barely controlled rage. He'd watched the entire encounter through the Executor's internal sensors, heard every word, felt every implication. Anos Voldigoad wasn't just powerful, he was dangerously persuasive. He didn't attack the Empire directly, didn't threaten its systems or attempt to lead rebellion. Instead, he attacked far more subtly, by offering people choices they'd forgotten they had. The Emperor had built his rule on the careful management of alternatives. People served the Empire because opposition seemed futile, because the cost of resistance outweighed the pain of compliance. He'd cultivated learned helplessness across an entire galaxy. And now someone was casually offering to break those chains. He must be eliminated, Palpatine hissed to the empty throne room. Not captured, not controlled, destroyed utterly. He represents an existential threat to everything I've built. But how? Conventional weapons were useless. The Force couldn't touch him. Even the Death Star, if it had still existed, might prove ineffective against someone who could erase matter from reality. No, this required a different approach. If direct confrontation was impossible, then manipulation would have to suffice. Find what Anos wanted, provide it, and subtly guide him away from Imperial interests. Or failing that, find something this being actually cared about and threaten it. Everyone had weaknesses. Even gods could be brought low if you found the right pressure points. Palpatine began making calculations, calling on decades of experience manipulating the galaxy's most powerful beings. Anos Voldigoad thought himself beyond influence, but no one was truly immune to carefully applied psychology. The Emperor would find his weakness. He always did. The coordinates Anos had provided led to a system the Empire had long since abandoned, a dying red giant star surrounded by dead worlds, their atmospheres stripped away by stellar winds over millions of years. No strategic value, no resources worth extracting, nothing but cosmic desolation. Perfect for what was about to occur. Emperor Palpatine's personal shuttle emerged from hyperspace at the system's edge, escorted by a full squadron of TIE defenders, the Empire's most advanced starfighters. The Emperor had not traveled in person to meet anyone in decades, but this situation demanded his direct intervention. On the largest of the dead worlds, Anos waited patiently, sitting on a throne of stone he'd shaped from the planet's surface with casual reality manipulation. He'd spent the past week systematically challenging Imperial forces across multiple sectors, not destroying them entirely, but demonstrating his absolute superiority in ways that couldn't be ignored or explained away. Star destroyers forced to retreat. Elite stormtrooper units rendered unconscious without being touched. Planetary governors who discovered their most secure facilities have been casually infiltrated. And through it all, a simple message: the Empire's authority is not absolute. The shuttle descended toward the barren surface, its repulsors kicking up clouds of ancient dust that hadn't been disturbed in eons. The boarding ramp lowered, and Emperor Palpatine emerged, ancient, bent, leaning heavily on his cane, but radiating dark side power that made the very air feel heavy. Behind him came royal guards, silent and deadly. And behind them, Darth Vader, his presence conflicted in ways that Anos could sense even without accessing the Force. Lord Voldigoad, Palpatine's voice was deceptively warm, carrying across the dead landscape. Thank you for agreeing to this meeting. I thought it time we spoke, candidly. Without pretense or intermediaries. Anos stood, descending from his throne to meet the Emperor on equal ground. Emperor Palpatine. I appreciate you making the journey personally. It shows respect, even if we both know you're here to attempt manipulation rather than genuine negotiation. Palpatine's smile widened. Refreshingly direct. I've spent decades dealing with beings who dance around truth with political language. Your honesty is novel. He gestured to the dead world around them. An appropriate setting, don't you think? A place removed from the concerns of the living galaxy, where two powerful beings can speak freely. You chose it deliberately, Anos observed. Isolated, witnesses only those you control completely, far from any who might overhear. You're about to make an offer you don't want recorded or repeated. Indeed. Palpatine moved closer, each step measured and calculated. You've made your point admirably. You exist outside my authority, possess power I cannot match directly, and have no interest in being controlled. I acknowledge all of this. That's unusually humble for a galactic emperor. Pragmatic, rather than humble. I've ruled for decades by recognizing reality rather than denying it. Palpatine stopped a few meters from Anos, his yellow eyes gleaming with ancient cunning. You seek entertainment, challenges, worthy opponents. I can provide all of those things in abundance, threats that genuinely test even your capabilities. Anos tilted his head, intrigued despite himself. Go on. The galaxy is vast, Lord Voldigoad, and my empire controls only a fraction of it. Beyond our borders lurk dangers that predate human civilization. Ancient species with technology we've barely begun to understand. Force-wielding cults that operate in the unknown regions. Dimensional anomalies that occasionally release things into our reality. Palpatine began to pace, his words carefully chosen. I've spent decades suppressing information about these threats, ensuring the galaxy's population remains ignorant of what lurks beyond the light. But you would find them fascinating. Challenges that aren't constrained by the limitations of this reality's normal rules. You're offering me targets, Anos said. Directing my attention away from your empire and toward external threats. I'm suggesting a mutually beneficial arrangement. You get genuine challenges that might actually provide the entertainment you seek. I get someone capable of handling threats that even the Empire struggles against. Palpatine's smile was serpentine. Think of it as pest control by someone uniquely qualified for the task. Anos considered the proposal. It was transparent manipulation, certainly. But it was also logical. The Empire's internal conflicts, rebels fighting tyranny, political maneuvering, military posturing, were ultimately mundane. But genuine cosmic-level threats? Beings or entities that operated on different principles entirely? That could be interesting. What kind of threats? Anos asked. Palpatine's eyes gleamed with triumph at the question. He gestured, and a holographic projector activated, showing a star map with various sectors highlighted in crimson. The Mungal. A sentient dark side entity that exists as a collective consciousness spread across multiple hosts. It's attempted to breach into known space 3 times in recorded history, and each time required massive loss of life to contain. Another sector highlighted. The Bedlam Spirits. Extradimensional beings that occasionally manifest when hyperspace calculations go catastrophically wrong. They exist partially outside normal reality and have driven entire civilizations to madness. A third highlight. The Sorcerers of Rand. Force users who've embraced philosophies that make the Sith look gentle by comparison. They seek the heat death of the universe itself and possess abilities my inquisitors can't counter. Anos studied the map with growing interest. These weren't ordinary threats, they were genuine anomalies, beings and entities that operated outside the galaxy's normal rules. The kind of opponents who might actually require him to use more than a fraction of his power. You've researched this presentation carefully, Anos observed. Tailored it specifically to appeal to someone seeking genuine challenges. Well done. I'm nothing if not thorough, Palpatine admitted. So, what do you say? Will you consider redirecting your considerable attention toward threats that warrant it, rather than wasting your time on internal Imperial politics? Anos was silent for a long moment, crimson eyes distant as he considered. The offer was tempting, genuinely so. These threats sounded far more interesting than dismantling the Empire piece by piece just to prove a point. But there was something else at play here. Something in Palpatine's eagerness, in the way Vader stood rigid and conflicted behind his master. I'll consider it, Anos said finally. On one condition. Name it. Full transparency. If I'm going to engage these threats on your behalf, even incidentally, I want complete access to Imperial archives. Everything you know about the Force, ancient Sith and Jedi history, technological secrets, hidden research. No restrictions, no redactions. Palpatine's smile faltered slightly. That's a substantial request. Imperial secrets are carefully guarded for good reasons. I'm sure they are. But if you want me focusing on external threats rather than examining your Empire's internal structure too closely, you'll provide what I ask. Anos's expression was pleasant but immovable. After all, I could simply continue what I've been doing, systematically demonstrating that your authority is conditional rather than absolute. Eventually, people might start wondering if they need your Empire at all. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Palpatine had built his rule on the perception of invincibility, of inevitable Imperial authority. Anos was eroding that perception with every casual display of superior power. Very well, Palpatine said after a long pause. You'll have access to the Imperial archives on Coruscant. I'll personally authorize your clearance. Though I warn you, knowledge can be dangerous, even for someone of your capabilities. I'll take that risk, Anos said dryly. When should I begin my pest control? At your convenience. The threats I've identified are persistent but not immediately critical. Take time to review the archives, prepare as you see fit. Palpatine turned to leave, then paused. One more thing, Lord Voldigoad. Out of curiosity, what would it take for you to join the Empire formally? Not as a servant, but as an equal partner in authority. Anos laughed, genuine amusement at the audacity of the question. I've been a king, emperor. I've ruled civilizations and commanded armies that spanned continents. I have no desire to repeat the experience. Administrative work is tedious, political maneuvering is tiresome, and maintaining order requires constant attention to details I find monumentally boring. He met Palpatine's eyes directly. I told you from the beginning, I seek entertainment, not power. Your empire holds no appeal because I've already done everything you're attempting to do. And I did it better. The only thing you can offer me is what you've just provided, information about genuine challenges worth my time. Palpatine studied him for a long moment, searching for deception or hidden motives, and finding only honest disinterest in political power. It was almost insulting, this being could trivially take everything Palpatine had spent a lifetime building, and simply didn't want it. "I believe you," Palpatine said finally. "Which makes you either the most dangerous being I've ever encountered, or the least threatening." "I haven't decided which." "Both, probably," Anos replied cheerfully. "I'm dangerous to anyone who attempts to control or manipulate me, but utterly harmless to those who simply leave me alone to pursue my interests." The Emperor nodded slowly and returned to his shuttle, Vader following silently behind. As the boarding ramp closed, Palpatine allowed himself a small smile. He'd achieved his objective. Anos would focus on external threats, leaving the Empire's internal affairs intact. The archives he'd promised access to were certainly valuable, but Palpatine had decades of experience hiding his most critical secrets within seemingly complete records. Let the Demon King read everything available, he'd find nothing that truly threatened Imperial power. And in the meantime, Palpatine would continue searching for Anos's weakness. Everyone had one. Even beings who claimed to transcend normal limitations. Inside the shuttle, Vader stood silently, his thoughts turbulent. He'd watched the entire exchange, seen his master negotiate as an equal, something he'd never witnessed before. Palpatine didn't negotiate, he commanded, manipulated, dominated. But with Anos, none of those tactics worked. The partial healing still burned in Vader's awareness, a constant reminder of what wholeness might feel like. Anos's offer remained open, full restoration, freedom from pain, the chance to discover what he might become without artificial limitations. All he had to do was choose it. But choosing it would mean betraying everything he'd built his existence around for decades. Would mean admitting that his service to Palpatine was based on fear and dependence rather than genuine loyalty. Was he strong enough to make that choice? Vader didn't know. And that uncertainty terrified him more than any enemy he'd ever faced. Anos watched the Imperial shuttle disappear into hyperspace, then turned his attention to the dying star overhead. The Emperor had played his gambit well, redirecting Anos toward legitimate threats while believing he protected Imperial interests. But Palpatine had made a critical miscalculation. He'd assumed Anos would focus exclusively on external threats and ignore the Empire's internal corruption. He'd assumed that granting archive access would satisfy Anos's curiosity without revealing anything truly dangerous. He'd never considered that Anos might have a deeper purpose, one that transcended simple entertainment. Anos had seen this pattern before. Tyrannical empires built on fear and oppression, maintained through deliberate suffering and controlled alternatives. They rose, they flourished, they inevitably collapsed into chaos when their foundations proved hollow. The galaxy didn't need him to destroy the empire. It would fall eventually on its own, probably leaving devastation and civil war in its wake. But what if there was a third option? Not supporting the empire, not supporting the rebellion, but preparing for what came after both. Anos smiled at the dying star, a plan forming that neither Palpatine nor the rebels had anticipated. "Let's see what this galaxy looks like when it's finally free to determine its own future," he said to no one in particular. Without emperors, without rebels, without the endless cycle of tyranny and revolution. He vanished from the dead world, leaving only his stone throne as evidence he'd ever been there. A monument to a conversation that might have just altered the galaxy's destiny. The Imperial archives occupied 12 subterranean levels beneath the palace on Coruscant, protected by security systems that could withstand orbital bombardment and guarded by protocols that had taken Palpatine decades to perfect. Within its climate-controlled vaults lay the accumulated knowledge of millennia, Jedi holocrons seized during Order 66, Sith texts recovered from Forbidden Worlds, scientific research too dangerous for public access, and historical records the Empire preferred remain hidden. Anos walked through the entrance as if the biometric scanners, neural inhibitors, and automated defense turrets simply didn't exist. They registered his presence, calculated threat assessments, and systematically shut down rather than attempt to engage something their programming couldn't categorize. The head archivist, A nervous human woman named Jocasta knew, former Jedi who'd been persuaded to serve the Empire rather than face execution, looked up from her data terminal as Anos entered the main research chamber. "Lord Voldigoad," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "The Emperor said you'd be coming. I've been instructed to provide complete access to our collections. Though I should warn you, some of the materials here are dangerous. Even for Force users." "I appreciate the concern," Anos replied, examining the vast chamber filled with shelves, data terminals, and secure vaults. "But I exist outside the Force's influence. Your dangerous materials can't corrupt what they can't touch." Jocasta studied him with the analytical eye of someone who'd spent a lifetime cataloging knowledge. "You're not from this galaxy, are you? Not just another planet or species, actually from outside our reality entirely." "Perceptive. Yes, I crossed dimensional barriers to arrive here. Your galaxy's force energy created a resonance that drew my attention." "Fascinating." Despite her circumstances, genuine scholarly interest flickered in her eyes. "I have questions. And I'll answer them," Anos interrupted gently. "But first, I need to understand this galaxy's true history. Not the propaganda or sanitized versions, but the complete record. Start with the Force itself. What is it, really? Beyond the mystical philosophy and religious interpretations." Jocasta hesitated, old Jedi instincts warring with pragmatic necessity. Then she made a decision that would have horrified her former masters. She chose truth over dogma. "Follow me." She led him to a secure vault containing the oldest records, texts that predated the Republic itself, written in languages that required specialized translation matrices to comprehend. She activated a holographic display showing a star map that stretched back tens of thousands of years. "The Force," she began, her voice taking on the cadence of a teacher, "is described by both Jedi and Sith as an energy field created by all living things. But that's incomplete. The truth is more complex and more troubling." The hologram shifted, showing ancient civilizations rising and falling across millennia. "The Force exists independently of life, but life channels it, shapes it, gives it consciousness, perhaps. Or the appearance of consciousness. The oldest texts suggest the Force isn't truly neutral, it has patterns, tendencies, something approaching will." "The Celestials," Anos said, recognizing the pattern from his earlier research on Moraband. "Ancient beings who shaped this galaxy before current civilizations arose." Jocasta's eyes widened. "You've encountered references to them?" "Most of those texts were destroyed by both Jedi and Sith as heretical. The Celestials supposedly existed beyond the Force, or perhaps created aspects of it. The records are fragmentary and contradictory." "Show me everything you have on them." For hours, they worked through the archives together. Jocasta proved to be an invaluable guide, her encyclopedic knowledge connecting disparate sources that Anos would have taken days to correlate. And as they worked, a picture emerged that troubled even someone of Anos's experience. The Force wasn't simply an energy field. It was closer to a universal operating system, the fundamental code underlying reality in this galaxy. And like any complex system, it had been modified, altered, deliberately shaped by ancient beings for purposes that remained unclear. The light side and dark side weren't natural dualities. They were imposed classifications, artificial boundaries created to channel the Force's expression into controllable forms. Before those classifications existed, the Force had been wilder, more chaotic, and infinitely more powerful. "This explains much," Anos said, reviewing a text that described pre-Republic Force users who could accomplish feats that modern Jedi and Sith would consider impossible. "Your galaxy's Force users have been operating within artificially imposed limitations for thousands of years, never realizing that the boundaries they respect aren't natural laws, they're programming." "That's heresy," Jocasta said weakly, though her expression suggested she'd suspected something similar for years. "The Jedi Code teaches that the Force has inherent nature, that light and dark reflect fundamental cosmic truths. The Jedi Code teaches what the Code's authors wanted to believe, Anos corrected gently. Look at the evidence you've shown me. Pre-Jedi Force users accomplished things that violate your current understanding of what's possible. They weren't stronger or more talented, they simply weren't constrained by the conceptual framework that came later. He pulled up another record, this one showing the formation of the Jedi Order itself. Here. The original Jedi weren't peacekeepers or philosophers. They were warriors who learned to channel the Force through strict emotional control because uncontrolled access was too dangerous. The Code wasn't wisdom, it was a safety protocol that eventually became religious doctrine. Jocasta sat heavily in a chair, decades of certainty crumbling. If you're right, then everything the Jedi stood for, everything I believed, was built on incomplete understanding, Anos finished. Not lies, exactly. But truths selected and shaped to serve a particular vision of what Force users should be. The Sith did the same thing, just in the opposite direction, embracing passion and emotion as their path to power. He turned to face her directly. Both philosophies are limitations. Both restrict their practitioners to a narrow band of what the Force actually allows. And both have led this galaxy into endless cycles of conflict because neither can accept that the other might have partial truth. So what's the alternative? Jocasta asked, genuinely curious despite her disorientation. If light and dark are both artificial constructs, what's the real nature of the Force? Potential, Anos said simply. Raw, undefined potential that can be shaped by will and understanding. Neither good nor evil, neither light nor dark, just power waiting to be directed by those who can access it without imposing preconceived limitations. He gestured to the archives around them. This knowledge, the full history you've preserved here, it's valuable not because it supports one side or another, but because it reveals the truth beneath the mythology. If Force users could access this information, learn the real history, they might transcend the artificial divide that's defined your galaxy for millennia. The Emperor would never allow that, Jocasta said. He's built his power on maintaining the Sith philosophy, on being the ultimate dark side master. If people learned that his entire framework was based on artificial limitations. Exactly, Anos agreed. Which is why he granted me access to these archives but assumed I'd keep what I learned to myself. He doesn't understand that I have no interest in hoarding knowledge, only in understanding systems so I can decide whether they're worth preserving or deserve to be dismantled. He began copying files, his demonic powers allowing him to absorb and perfectly retain information at rates that would take normal beings years to process. Jedi training manuals, Sith holocrons, pre-Republic Force techniques, celestial references, all of it flowing into his consciousness and being analyzed, categorized, comprehended. What are you planning? Jocasta asked, recognizing the signs of someone preparing for significant action. Anos smiled. I'm going to do something that will probably irritate both the Empire and the Rebellion. I'm going to make this knowledge public. That's insane. The chaos alone will be significant but temporary, Anos interrupted. Yes, revealing the truth will destabilize existing power structures. Yes, both Jedi and Sith philosophy will be questioned. Yes, the Empire's authority will suffer when people realize the Force they've been told to fear is based on incomplete understanding. He turned to face her fully. But the alternative is perpetuating a system built on deliberate ignorance. The galaxy remains trapped in cycles of tyranny and rebellion because neither side understands the real nature of what they're fighting over. Someone needs to break that cycle. And you've appointed yourself that someone. I'm uniquely qualified, Anos pointed out. I exist outside the Force, can't be corrupted by any side, have no political interests to protect, and possess the power to ensure my actions can't be prevented by those who prefer the truth remain hidden. Jocasta was silent for a long moment, then made a decision that would define the rest of her life. I'll help you. I've spent years serving an empire I despise, preserving knowledge that should be free. If you're actually going to release this information, she stood, moving to a secure terminal. Then let's make sure you have everything. The complete archives, not just what Palpatine wanted you to see. For the next several hours, they worked together, the former Jedi archivist and the Demon King from another reality, compiling the galaxy's most dangerous and valuable knowledge into a format that could be distributed across every major information network simultaneously. When they finished, Anos had in his possession a complete record of Force history, training techniques from extinct orders, Sith and Jedi secrets, and most critically, proof that the light-slash-dark dichotomy was imposed rather than inherent. "One question before you release this," Jocasta said as Anos prepared to depart. "What happens to people like me? Former Jedi, former Sith, everyone whose entire identity is built on philosophies you're about to reveal as incomplete?" Anos considered the question seriously. "You adapt. You learn. You discover what you can become when you're not constrained by ancient dogma." He smiled. "Or you cling to old beliefs despite contradictory evidence and gradually become irrelevant. That's the beautiful thing about truth, it doesn't require everyone to accept it immediately. It just has to be available for those ready to understand." He moved toward the exit, then paused. "Thank you, Jocasta Nu. Your assistance has been invaluable. When the Empire falls, and it will, make sure to survive. The galaxy will need people who understand knowledge is meant to be shared, not hoarded." "Wait," she called out as he reached the door. "One more thing. Why are you doing this? You said you came here for entertainment, for challenges. How does releasing information serve that purpose?" Anos's smile widened. "Because the most interesting challenge isn't defeating powerful opponents, it's changing systems that have endured for millennia. The Empire, the Rebel Alliance, the Force philosophies themselves, they're all part of an ancient pattern. Breaking that pattern, watching this galaxy discover what it can become without artificial limitations." His crimson eyes gleamed with anticipation. "That's entertainment worth pursuing." He vanished from the archives, leaving Jocasta alone with the suddenly empty terminals and the awareness that she just helped trigger the largest paradigm shift in galactic history. Across Coruscant, in his throne room, Emperor Palpatine suddenly went rigid as he felt a massive disturbance in the Force. Not an attack, not a threat, something subtler and infinitely more dangerous. Information was flooding across the holonet. Billions of files appearing simultaneously on every major network, impossible to trace or shut down. His most carefully guarded secrets, Jedi training records, Sith techniques, and worst of all, historical proof that the Force philosophies he'd built his power around were incomplete and artificially constrained. "No," he whispered, his aged hands gripping his throne hard enough to crack the armrests. "No, no, and no." He'd thought Anos simply wanted access to knowledge for personal use. He'd never imagined the being would weaponize that knowledge by making it universally available. In a single action, Anos had undermined decades of carefully maintained mystery and fear. Across the galaxy, Force-sensitive beings were downloading the files. Rebels discovering Jedi techniques their order never taught. Imperial officers reading proof that Sith philosophy was based on artificial limitations. Ordinary citizens learning that the Force wasn't the exclusive domain of trained masters, just a natural phenomenon that could be accessed by anyone with proper understanding. The carefully controlled monopoly on Force knowledge was shattering in real time. And there was nothing Palpatine could do to stop it. On the rebel base on Yavin 4, Luke Skywalker stared at his data pad in wonder as he scrolled through Force techniques that made his limited training from Obi-Wan seem like kindergarten lessons. Beside him, Leia read historical records that explained why the Force felt so natural to her despite never having been trained. On the Executor, Darth Vader stood alone in his meditation chamber, reviewing files that showed him exactly how Palpatine had manipulated his training, deliberately limiting his development to ensure he'd never surpass his master. And on thousands of worlds across the galaxy, people who'd been told the Force was beyond their understanding discovered that knowledge had been deliberately withheld, not to protect them, but to maintain existing power structures. Anos watched from orbit as the galaxy's information networks lit up with unprecedented activity, pleased with his work. He'd given them truth. What they did with it was their choice. But one way or another, this galaxy would never be the same. The galaxy burned with revelation. Within 72 hours of the knowledge release, the Empire's carefully constructed authority began fracturing. Not through military defeat or rebel victory, but through something far more insidious, the realization that the power structures everyone had accepted as inevitable were built on deliberately maintained ignorance. Force-sensitive children hidden by their families for fear of Inquisitor abduction were now being taught in secret by parents using the newly available techniques. Imperial officers discovered that the dark side mastery Palpatine claimed as unique was simply one interpretation among many, and not even the most effective one. Rebel cells found themselves empowered with Jedi knowledge that had been lost for generations, techniques that didn't require years of temple training to master. The Emperor raged, but his rage was impotent. Anos had distributed the information through systems that couldn't be traced, couldn't be shut down, and couldn't be controlled. Attempting to suppress it only validated its importance. Darth Vader made his choice 3 days after the revelation. He found Anos on a remote moon, standing beneath an ancient tree, one of the last natural forests in a sector dominated by industrial worlds. "I accept your offer," Vader said without preamble. "Full restoration. I want to know what I could have been without his chains." Anos smiled, genuinely pleased. "A wise decision. Though I warn you, wholeness comes with responsibility. You'll have to decide what to do with your freedom." The healing took seconds. Damaged lungs regenerated, burned flesh restored, cybernetic dependencies eliminated. When it was complete, Anakin Skywalker stood in his armor for the first time in decades without pain, without limitation, without the constant reminder of his failures. He removed his helmet with hands that no longer trembled, breathing unfiltered air, seeing through his own eyes. Tears streamed down his scarred but healing face, not from sorrow, but from the overwhelming sensation of being truly alive again. "What will you do now?" Anos asked. Anakin looked at his hands, whole, strong, unburdened. "I don't know," he admitted. "I've served darkness for so long, I'm not sure I remember what else I could be." "Then discover it," Anos suggested. "You have time now. Use it to become someone worth being, rather than someone defined by old failures." The Rebel Alliance fractured as well, though for different reasons. With Jedi knowledge freely available, the mystique of the Force as something rare and special evaporated. Luke Skywalker found himself training dozens, then hundreds of Force sensitives using techniques he'd only just learned himself. The rebellion transformed from a military organization into something closer to a movement, decentralized, adaptable, impossible to eliminate because it existed in the minds of millions rather than the hierarchy of leaders. Mon Mothma approached Anos one final time, on a world he'd chosen specifically for its symbolic value, the ruins of the old Jedi Temple on Coruscant, now open to public access despite Imperial protests. "You've torn down everything," she said, though without accusation. "The Empire, our rebellion, the Force philosophies themselves. What are we supposed to build from these ruins?" "Whatever you choose," Anos replied. "I've given you freedom from imposed limitations. What you do with that freedom is your responsibility, not mine." "And where will you go now?" Anos gazed at the stars visible through the temple's broken dome. "There are still challenges in this galaxy. The Mungal, the Bedlam spirits, threats Palpatine mentioned and others he didn't. I'll face them, test myself, and continue my entertainment." He turned to face her. "But I've also accomplished something I didn't initially intend. I've broken the cycle. Your galaxy won't repeat the same patterns anymore, at least not for a few generations. Whether what comes next is better or worse is up to all of you." Emperor Palpatine died 3 months later, killed not by rebellion or assassination, but by the collapse of the systems he'd built his power upon. The dark side couldn't sustain him when millions of Force users simultaneously rejected the artificial limitations that made Sith power seem supreme. He simply faded, his connection to the Force severing as the galaxy collectively redefined what the Force could be. The empire fragmented into successor states, some tyrannical, some surprisingly enlightened, all forced to compete for legitimacy in ways Palpatine's monolithic rule never had to consider. Anos watched from the edge of known space, satisfied with his work. He'd come seeking entertainment and found something more valuable, a galaxy with genuine potential, freed from the philosophical constraints that had limited it for millennia. He would remain for a time, facing the cosmic threats he'd promised to engage, testing himself against genuine challenges that required more than casual effort. The Mungo learned that sentient darkness was no match for someone who existed beyond such classifications. The Bedlam spirits discovered that extra-dimensional existence offered no protection against beings who could rewrite dimensional laws themselves. But eventually, he would depart. Perhaps return to his own world, perhaps explore other realities, perhaps find new galaxies with different challenges and different systems to understand. The galaxy far, far away would continue without him. Changed, chaotic, struggling to redefine itself in the absence of ancient certainties. But genuinely free for the first time in recorded history. And that, Anos reflected as he prepared to face his next challenge, was the best entertainment of all. Watching people discover what they could become when no one told them what was impossible. In the end, the Demon King of Tyranny had done what neither Jedi nor Sith ever accomplished, he'd freed the Force itself from the limitations imposed upon it. The galaxy would never forget the being who'd arrived from beyond reality and casually dismantled everything they thought they knew. Some would curse his name, others would celebrate it, most would simply try to survive in the transformed world he'd left behind. But they would all be free to make that choice. And for Anos Voldigoad, that was legacy enough.